All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gnomon stage for this event on real-time visual effects. I'm really happy to be able to be the kind of mediator and host of this event because these two gentlemen that are joining us tonight are Gnomon alumni and industry veterans in a very difficult, challenging, and rewarding field that's been growing and changing so much over the years. And they're going to share some of their wisdom on how they started their careers, how they've continued to move up in their careers, and then also share some visual effects knowledge and experiences with you as well. So I want to thank first and foremost Lenovo for sponsoring our events. You know, we're here at the Lenovo stage on Gnomon's campus, so that's great. Hello to everybody who's online and everybody who's here with us. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce these two guys. This is Kevin Milmoe. He's a senior visual effects artist from Deviation Games. Also, he's going to tell you more about his previous career, but before that at Respawn. And we also have Nova Baghdasarian Hunamanda. Sorry, he told me not to say his name correctly, so I'm going to mess it up for him.
That's totally
cool. But he's also going to tell you about his stuff. He was at, I believe, Sledgehammer previously, correct? And then now he's at Psyonix as a senior visual effects artist. So both these guys have a lot of really cool work and a lot of really cool projects that they've worked on. And also, I think what's interesting about it is the range. Because it's not, with visual effects, oftentimes we get caught up in fire and smoke and particles and, the natural phenomena stuff, which both of these guys have done a lot of. But they've also had the opportunity to work in the fantasy worlds, and specifically like, the Star Wars universe and also in the world of Rocket League, where you get a little bit more creativity and a little bit more maybe artistic control and expression that you would get in a normal environment. So without any more delay, I'm going to have these guys come up. The way this guy's going to happen, they're going to do a little introduction, show you some of their work, give you a little bit of presentation, and then we're going to do a Q&A at the end. So if you have questions, if you're thinking about stuff, just keep it to yourselves. And then when we wrap up, I'll call on you guys and we'll have you guys ask the questions. And that goes for everybody online as well. So take it away, guys.
I guess I'll go first. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. So I'm Kevin, senior visual effects artist at Deviation Games. I started out my journey about 8 years ago. I came to Gnomon. I started what was then the 3-year program. Went through, did foundation stuff, took all of Max's classes, started learning on Unreal. And after that, I got hired at Respawn Entertainment, working on Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. Did that for a couple of years, and then once that game shipped, I moved on to pre-production for Jedi Fallen Order or Jedi Survivor, which is coming out soon in like a month or two. So that should be fun. Hope you guys have seen the trailers and all the fun stuff coming out. And most recently, I came to Deviation Games to work on an unannounced project that has a lot of exciting opportunities, a lot of new information to learn, a lot of new things. So that's my journey here.
Cool, man. Hey, everybody. I'm Nova Baghdasarian. My journey started at Gnomon in 2012. I was an LA native, and I heard about this school from a close friend of mine, and it was like right up my alley. So I came here, and originally I wanted to get into VFX for movies, but up in the last year of Gnomon, my third year, the VFX game course was relatively new, and I took it. And as soon as I opened up Unreal, I was like, okay, yeah, this is it. Feels like a video game. I was always into video games. So yeah, right after Gnomon, I got a job at Sledgehammer Games up in the Bay Area. We were working on Advanced Warfare, Call of Duty Advanced Warfare at the time, followed right by Call of Duty World War II. So it was really cool working at a big like franchise studio like that. Had a lot of its perks. Right after that, I was really into a game called Rocket League, and I checked out the Psyonix hiring page, and they were hiring a VFX artist, so I applied, and I've been there ever since. Should we go over some of our work?
Probably.
Cool.
But first, I think we got to touch on like what is real-time effects, right? Like, because it covers a lot of bases. It touches on a lot of disciplines, and it's not always clear what our job encompasses. So we can play some of our work and show you guys what it is, and touch on how we interact with the rest of the studio, how our work is made, and what we have to kind of build on as a foundation of knowledge for it. and kind of the difficulties that come with that, the growing pains of getting to a new studio, our experiences with those studios, and how we kind of grew along that way. So
yeah, by the end of this, we hope that like we can impart as much knowledge and insight that we've grew over the almost 15 years combined experience. We're going to cover hopefully a lot. Hope you guys are excited.
So let's play. I'll go through my stuff because it's way easier to just have videos playing and show you guys and talk over it because that gives you guys something to watch. So real-time effects, you get a lot of kind of the usual, like Max was talking about, like explosions, fire, destruction, creatures, and a lot of like ambient things like waterfalls, rain, snowstorms, that type of stuff. So you kind of cover the gamut, and it's really just whatever's interactable or changes states in games is pretty much what we have to touch, right? Like if you have something that has to change from static to active or moving to still, generally there's some sort of transition state, right? And you kind of have to cover that, right? Because a lot of what we do is about the illusion of it, because we don't have the render time that films have to go over like a really smooth transition between like something turning from liquid to solid, something going up in flames and kind of like falling apart, right? So we have a lot of smoke and mirrors that we have to build, and then it goes through both simulating, generating textures, building blueprints, and making sure the game functionality works, and touching on animations, just kind of all over the place, right? So some of my stuff that's been playing right now has been a lot of that, right? Like between AI, where you are in combat, you have to have readable attacks where you know what your opponents are doing. The player wants to react to them. A lot of that is design driven. You have vistas that have to look nice, and they have to kind of be like these really interesting moments that the player can stop and watch and enjoy their like immersive world that we created for them, right? So they kind of have to be that like showcase moment with a little bit of action in there. You got to have like boss fights that have to feel, their attacks have to feel grounded, but at the same time they have to impact, right? I don't know, Nova, if you want to chime in on this. I've been going off for a minute.
I mean, I've just been watching this. This is really cool, man.
Thanks.
Good stuff. Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff that Kevin went into, and it goes into like how much VFX encompasses. You can be doing some of the most simplest stuff one day, and then the next day they have like a whole new boss for you to kind of work with, and then you have to collaborate with animation and audio. So I can show you guys some of the work I've done.
I'm gonna close mine.
What if I don't want to?
I'll send you the files. You can watch them later.
Here is my Call of Duty reel. So this was my Call of Duty stuff, and then completely different style and everything was when I went over to Rocket League. So a challenge in itself was like going from a very realistic atmosphere to now it's like, hey, just make some cool goal explosions that fit in this Rocket League world. Um, it's probably one of the biggest challenges of my career was like switching over to that style side. It was also one of the more fun, in my opinion. Uh, realism is a little easier because you have like all of this reference that you can just go off of and easily like hit a target. You know what your target is to hit. But coming onto something like this, where the environment is very fast paced, you're just constantly like working on a new effect, and there's not really any time for concept. You can request concept, of course, depending on the studio and who you have working with you. But a lot of the time, it's just like, hey, make some really cool stuff, and you have a month to do it. Um, yeah, I'm sure you know what that's like.
Every day, especially requesting concept.
Oh yeah, it's cool when you get
great.
concept, but a lot of the time you probably won't get concept, and you'll just have to do whatever you think is right based off of your eye.
And you touched on it a little bit. One of the things that I enjoy about the job is that you get to work with everybody. Like they're pretty much every discipline will work with you at some point. Like between design, environment art, character art, cinematics, everybody comes to effects afterwards because, as Noah was saying, you add that little sprinkle on afterwards, right? Like you kind of put the cherry on top of what they are preparing. So in addition to being super collaborative, right, you're working with everybody to make that scene or that effect work. Um, you're just kind of adding all that a little bit of emotion into it afterwards, right? Because a lot of effects are about the impact of that effect and how it makes the player feel. Like some of these goal explosions are just like you want to feel that oomph or be like that proud moment you have when you make a goal in Rocket League, right? Uh, and it's really about portraying a feeling to the player in visual form, and it covers a lot of things. Just in terms of foundation as well. Like you kind of have to become familiar with the foundation principles of animation, right? And your art fundamentals as well, like your silhouette, your primary reads, getting your primary, secondary, and tertiary details down. A lot of that stuff really comes into play when you make these, and it's really just about conveying that emotion, and you have to kind of take all of these factors and combine them into one effect.
Yeah, for sure. Super important topics like just the principles of animation. That every effect we do, we consider the principles of animation, like just making sure that there's some anticipation to a goal explosion, or specifically for Rocket League, when you score a goal, you only have 3 seconds to see the effect before it cuts into replay and the game restarts, or you just go into the next phase of the game. So like working in that time frame was super challenging. But touching on something Kevin was talking about, how you're kind of collaborating with every single part of the game. For example, this one, I had to work with tools engineers because I wanted these rockets to actually demo the cars around them. So it was a lot of back and forth with the tools engineer, him trying to figure out what I wanted, what I needed. And then after that, I was working with animation to get the missiles kind of falling down and heading towards the goal the way I wanted to. Same with the Phoenix goal explosion. It was literally just me working with a modeler and an animator back and forth until all three of us got something that looked really good. So that collaboration is really key. I think you guys will get that here a lot at Gnomon. The importance of that is really, really cool. Like let's say one of you are going into VFX and you have a friend that is doing modeling. You guys can both get a really cool demo reel piece by combining your efforts. And like you're like, hey, you model this and I'll add some really cool VFX to it. and now you guys got an amazing demo reel piece that's not just something on a black background, for example. Which I think we'll get more into, like what makes a good demo reel and what doesn't. But yeah.
Yeah. That timing part is probably one of the hardest things that I run into, because there's just frequently it's just like you have half a second to get that feeling across, right? And I was talking about that earlier. Like you're trying to impart a feeling on the player, and with games especially, a lot of games that are player focused and meant to uh, give the player agency, so allow them to have inputs that respond quickly and make you feel like you are in charge of the player in a rewarding way, means that for effects you have to make an effect that hits and makes the player feel like that in a split second, which is one of the hardest things.
Yeah, like that explosion was. This is so cool, man.
Thanks.
Like
that whole sequence.
That was like 3 seconds, but you have to convey like this huge explosion. You have to convey all this action in such a short time frame.
And that was all like a lot of these are I had to collaborate with destruction artists because we had like a specific dynamics artist to work with, right? So he was doing all of the crumbling rocks, but there's a lot of dust and debris that goes along with it that you can't get from a sim in Houdini and then put that in game, right? Because that's a little bit too heavy. So then it goes to me, and on top of that, we have to go to designers to make sure it plays in level at the right time, right? Because there's these cinematic moments where you have to cross a threshold, you see this encounter happen, and you have to trigger this like reveal, right? Um, and so there's animators involved to make sure that brute kicked through the wall. There's a destruction artist to make sure the wall crumbles and breaks properly and looks cool. There's designers who are making sure that the level kind of showcases it properly, like you see that vista and it happens in camera. And then there's me, and I sprinkle on some debris, some snow. You crack the ceiling a little bit. You throw in a little bit more dust and physics-based rocks that kind of just like crumble around and fall in place, and it all kind of comes together.
And there is like definitely different versions of what you can do as a VFX artist. Like you said, like destruction. There are literally people that just do destruction for video games, and that is their entire career, and they just get really good at it, like prop destruction, and that's all under the umbrella of VFX. Um, and something you also touched on was working with game designers. I think it's probably one of the most important uh, collaborations is you a VFX and a game designer, because all of your VFX, like you mentioned earlier, need to be readable. They need to convey what the action is, and the people that are mostly in charge of that are the game designers. They are programming that. They are engineering what is happening in that game in that moment, and they will love you if your VFX can convey what they're trying to convey. So
that's also one of the challenges, because a lot of times designers will have a very specific vision of what it needs to be, right? And you'll also have your art director who has a very specific vision of what it wants to be, and then you have your lead who might think has to go a certain way, right? So kind of finding the balance between all those is a big part of the job as well, and it's always tough to get that all to line up properly, because sometimes the tech doesn't allow it, so you kind of have to pull some illusions around and make sure it happens, but it doesn't quite happen.
yeah, I like that you brought up all the different kinds of feedback you're getting. Because yeah, game designers will say, I want it to look a certain way, but if your art director is telling you exactly what they want to see, that is probably your priority, is making your art director happy. Um, they they will guide you for the most part, and a really good art director will make you an incredible VFX artist. Like when I first got to Sledgehammer Games, my art director then really helped me with just getting a good eye for that timing aspect we were talking about. I already had some general sense of it, but um, the way she put it into perspective was honestly kind of career changing for me. I was able to impart that like on everybody else that I was helping or giving feedback on. And it's just like the idea that a really good effect isn't something that's flashy 100% of the time. If it's flashy 100% of the time, you're just going to be bored of it. So it needs to have that like tension, that build up, that impact, that gravity, or if it's most effects, whether they're stylized or real, will have some form of real life physics to it. So like I said, gravity or like heat going up or heat rising, and all of those little things will pull together to make a really good effect. And if you already have a good eye, I still think that feedback from other people that know what they're talking about is invaluable, because you can be working on something for so long and you will miss details for sure because of how often you've just looked at it. And then somebody comes along, they're like, "Oh yeah, you're just missing the gravity looks weird, or you're missing something," and right away you just add that one little thing, and it takes your effect from good to great.
My favorite most recently is there was a smoke like grenade that I had to work on at one point, and it just didn't feel quite right. It had like volumetrics, it had a nice rendered sprite, it looked great, whatever. There was one missing element, and it was a contact shadow. And all you had to do was put this slightly transparent little circle on the ground,
Yeah.
and it just brought it all together. And it's just small things like that, which usually help, like your colleagues will help you with, right? Like you go back and forth with friends in the studio all the time, and it's great.
I remember my time at Sledgehammer. So I should start this off by saying VFX is actually really understaffed. So it is a really good career to go into.
Very.
Um, and my time at Sledgehammer, I got there, and halfway into working on World War II, every VFX artist quit, and it was literally just me. And my my lead technical artist at the time jokingly threatened to kill me if I left. At least I hope he was joking, but um, and it just goes to show that it's a you just don't know what's going to get thrown at you. And generally, I would say VFX artists touch every part of development. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I've worked through every stage of a title at this point, from pre-production through production to the the crunch at the end where you have to get it all together and make it polished. Um, and you do a lot of things like setting up systems for yourself later on, like things as simple as the wind in a level, right? You have to figure out where your wind is coming from, how it swirls and eddies around your level. You have to make tools to update that as the world gets updated, right? So you have to be able to have systems in place that will support you later on, and then from there you can kind of build your kit, right? Your library of like, oh, if I have dust coming off the top of a mountain, right? Like, oh, I've got this blowing wind. Oh, I have this fire that's a torch, right? Like I have this one torch. We're early in production, we can make more later. Um, and then later on you start to be like, okay, well, we need 15 different type of fires because we have to do, I don't know, we need an enemy that holds a torch and throws it at you, but we need 15 variants on it. uh, then it starts to get into like the details of it, but you touch every single level of it, and you can prepare yourself for the later levels, as you work on what you're currently working on, which I is kind of one of the big challenges, I feel like, because like you can make, if you understand how to make things modularly, if you can take advantage of uh, building systems with parameters that you can change so that your systems work in 20 different areas, instead of having to make one bespoke thing per area, you can make one system and have that work for you, right? Like you take this and you put in the effort initially to understand your parameters, your variables, whatever, the tech side of things, and then that saves you dozens of hours later on, which is one of the things I went into heavily when I started learning effects. I was a little bit more tech minded. That was kind of where I dove into things because I was like, oh, I can make like things change dynamically over time via blueprints in Unreal, right?
I was the complete opposite. I did not want to do any tech side of things. I just wanted to make cool shit. That's why I became really good friends with the technical artists at every studio I'm at. Just little tip.
True. I still love my technical artists,
Oh yeah.
but I don't talk with them nearly as frequently, I think.
Damn, messing
Yeah,
up.
I know, I'm messing up. It's usually design.
I guess we can segue into like a little bit about what you can expect in a studio when you first start there. Like I said, I wasn't like super technical about everything. I was definitely curious about it, and I've learned a lot over my years doing this. But when I first got there, I just had a good eye, in my opinion, at that time, and I wanted to focus on that. So luckily, Call of Duty was a really big franchise. They already had a lot of the tools in place. So when I got there, I was just focusing on learning those tools as fast as possible because they were proprietary. So none of my Unreal knowledge. I mean, some Unreal knowledge helps. The basics of just game development kind of will follow through with whatever tools like you're using. So, but it was proprietary, so I had to learn a lot of like ins and outs of what was currently in place, and that was kind of my experience. It was just starting off super small, like adding little leaves flying in the wind, or little dust crumbling off of just walls. And the more into it I got, and the more I requested to get bigger scenes, whatever, if they're cinematics or destruction and all that stuff, because that's kind of what I was really into before getting to Call of Duty. Um, all of that just depends on how you drive yourself in that studio. If you're sitting there waiting for people to give you tasks, you're gonna get the really boring, shitty tasks. Um, Not to say environment effects are boring. They can be really cool. Like if you have like a really dope piece and there is a concept for it. For example, um, I really enjoyed doing the environment effects for this scene right here because this scene was just so. It was so boring before I added effects to it, but I got a concept artist to like kind of give me a quick sketch up of what he thought. So yeah, all the smoke and the ashes and the dust and the tracers in the background, like I felt good about it. I was like, this is a really cool piece that came from a concept that I made real, basically. Um, and I think you'll get that a lot from like AAA studios or studios that have a big name in a franchise. They'll have a lot of these systems in place, so it's up to you to kind of like strive for learning as quick as you can, talking to the right people. By the right people, I mean like the engineers, whoever built the tools, the technical artists, and then some of your colleagues, like the senior. If you come in as a junior, talk to your senior and be like, "Hey, man, like, what do you think about this?" Just keep poking at them. How does this look? How does this effect look? And it'll surprise you at how fast you can progress at a new studio.
Yeah, a lot of that stuff is also they'll give you time at the beginning, right? When you go to a new place. I mean, I've been lucky enough to work in Unreal for my career, so I knew what I was getting into in terms of engine. Um, but there's always going to be some sort of proprietary at everywhere you go. So they'll have their own custom code to do, I don't know, land leaves on the ground and keep them there, so that maybe like in Ghost of Tsushima, you can move around and the wind will kick it up, right? So that you have to have a system in place for that, and that's usually proprietary. Uh, or at least some sort of convoluted, right? Um, they'll give you time to kind of get into it. They'll give you the simple tasks that kind of get you prepared to take on the big ones later on, right? Because they're also invested in making sure that you know what you're doing and you're delivering something that's cool. Because it's in everybody's benefit to make a good product, right? Because that's at the end of the day, you're shipping a game. It's a product. You want to make it good. You want to get like a critically good reception and all that. Um, but I mean, I found it really nice to work in Unreal because that's what I learned at Gnomon, right? That's what I started out with. I understand the systems. I understand how it works. Uh, getting deeper and deeper into the systems that Unreal uses, made like blueprints, materials, getting into Niagara as a particle effect system as it kind of became the main thing to use with Unreal when Unreal 5 or 4.27 came out. That stuff was all like a huge benefit because then I had the time to get deeper into the more nuanced things that I was interested in when I got that time at the beginning, right? Because proprietary systems, you can kind of get through, but if you understand the foundation of it, if you know like, oh, these blueprints do this, like I understand the nodes that I'm working with, I understand what this is, you can kind of get adjusted faster and faster and faster.
And there's so many resources out there. GDC talks. Like there's a GDC talk by Veer Sharma. It came out in 2021, and it's just called Shader Sauce. And even till this day, I go back and look. I just watch that entire thing because it's a lot of the foundations you're talking about that carry over no matter what engine you go to. And when you're getting when you get so far into like doing real-time VFX, you might be doing one particular thing for so long that you forget some of the foundational and the basics. So like I will literally always go back to this video and just for even inspiration, just to like maybe I should go from something super advanced and let me just tone it back a little bit. And sometimes it's all you need.
I got into that with math and like shaders. I mean, for anybody interested in the mathier side of things, the more tech-focused side of effects, I started getting into more linear algebra. Like when I left Gnomon, I was like, okay, I didn't really learn this stuff in college. Like this is all crazy, like new to me, and just not even super complex math, but just learning things like cross products and dot products is super helpful because it's one of the best ways to get data because that's all you're working with is data. Usually it's a 0 to 1 range or a mask, right? That's a black and white texture that you can use as an alpha. And so getting more familiar with the numbers behind it and kind of learning a little bit more of the math side of things was super helpful. And there's all these videos or like Khan Academy, things like that. There's resources to help you learn that stuff. And once you get the kind of the basic principles of those things, it can help you push things even further, right? It's just one of those ways that you can make your materials change. And it, for me at least, learning that stuff helped me to gain a lot of confidence in that, right? Because once I learned those foundational things, I was like, oh well, of course I can do anything, right? Like just give me some time and give me some math, and I'm good. And that was one of those big things I learned.
Yeah, I will say shaders they can be super basic and they can be really complex, but as a VFX artist, you're almost dealing with shaders like pretty much every day. And Unreal is like, I know you love it and I love it too. And a lot of studios that are hiring are using Unreal. So I would definitely stay with it as long as you can. And Unreal 5 has some incredible content examples. If the math side of things scare you, which it scared the living shit out of me, honestly, but they have these content examples where they will literally show you in a really simplistic way how they're going about doing certain things with like dot product and cross product and all these things. I literally like have that open all the time because I'm always just referencing it.
I always have one installed.
Yeah.
It's super helpful. Like just being able to get that visual feedback is one of the helps me immensely because that's just like how I learn is visually, right? And that's not always an easy thing to have at your fingertips, but thankfully the content examples give that to you for free, right? And checking that out and just taking from that has helped me immensely, right? It's a great resource to use. One of those things that I go back to pretty much constantly, and I make sure I have at least one project of content examples installed, if not multiple, if I'm working with different like engine type or engine versions. Another one I use a lot is the Real-time VFX forums, realtimevfx.com. It's run by the guys at Beyond Effects, who are VFX studio that focus on real-time VFX for games. So they're kind of like a third-party vendor that do all that stuff. And their forums have some great information. It has tutorials on how to do kind of the more basic stuff. It has experts in their field who are kind of checking in and seeing what people are doing, right? And they're happy to answer questions. And taking advantage of those resources is huge for that. And I've used that countless times just to refer back to even videos from titles that are 10 years old to get back to foundations and kind of take that to the next level with the games now.
Have you done any of the little art tests that they have, the competition ones?
Oh, not the no, not those. But I've done plenty of art tests as they come around, right?
Yeah,
those are always fun.
Should we segue into some art tests and like some good do's and
don'ts?
We can
talk about them. Yeah. Do you want to talk about reels, or do you want to talk about art tests?
What do you want to talk about, Max?
Well, actually, I want to bring it back a little bit to what you guys were just talking about, because I think it's such a really important aspect of like the talk so far, and that was both your technical pursuits of like fundamental mathematics and physics and all the other stuff that you're learning. So you go to an art school, you learn all of these techniques, how to make stuff look good, how to focus on aesthetics, and then I know for your journey specifically, you didn't get into visual effects right away. You were focusing on environment art, focus on asset stuff. We were like really into that, doing some great work, and then you kind of like found visual effects later and started to pursue all that stuff. Yep. And then Nova, you're kind of on the opposite side of that spectrum, where you're talking about like these fundamental aesthetic, like design things, like color and shape and timing. And I think what's interesting about what both of you guys are saying is that twofold. One is the growth that you have as an artist, where you realize no matter where you're at and how big the IPs that you're working on are, and no matter how much responsibility you have at work, that the foundational skills, whether technical or artistic, are always the thing that you feel you need more of, right? Color, shape, language, timing, like the emotional interactions that you have with players, or how you're directing the viewer in a cinematic shot to go somewhere else. Which I liked what you talked about, Kevin, with the vista, right? Where you're like, there's a very specific goal that your visual effect is doing there to like orient the player at what they're seeing. It's not just to have something happening. It's storytelling on top of everything technical that you're doing. And so I think it's something that a lot of people that are new into visual effects, or maybe they've been in CG for a while, don't really connect with until you've been in it for a minute, which is how important those fundamental skills are. Because we see stuff like this and we want to be like you, right? Like I want to shoot missiles at cars. I want to have lightsabers cutting shit in half. But at the end of the day, every single effect you guys are doing is backwards compatible with fundamental concepts, and you can never be too good at that. Like you can study color theory your entire life and just become better and better and better at how you use color. Same thing with shape language. Same thing with dot products and cross products and matrices and all this other stuff. So for where I want to segue this is for people in here who are younger in their journey. Maybe you're pretty good with Houdini, maybe you're good with Unreal. Don't underestimate those building blocks, right? Of like sitting down and studying just shape, sitting down and studying a little bit more algebra, or a little bit more linear algebra, or understanding, some of the mathematical principles. You don't have to blow up a city. If you can manage to manipulate some vectors, some motion vectors in a scene, and do something very simple, making complexity, like you see on the screen, is about applying lots of these fundamental, simple concepts in well thought out, executed ways. And there's design, and there's iteration, and there's feedback, but there's also just the idea that if you are fundamentally strong with motion, and you're fundamentally strong with a little bit of tech, and you're fundamentally strong with aesthetically pleasing things and some storytelling, then you can do these big things without needing to be massively experienced and technical. But start small. And so I kind of wanted to throw back at you guys and kind of maybe get a couple of pieces of like information from your journeys, where you had like that aha moment, where you went from, this concept, this simple concept that changed the way. You kind of spoke a little bit on that, Nova, with this video, but could you guys give us like an example of like maybe one or two things, or one from each of you, of where you had this moment where the tech or the art or something that was fundamental, like upped your game?
Yeah, I can start. So kind of going back to like my transition from Call of Duty, which is super realistic, to Rocket League, which is very stylized. I wasn't used to that stylized look yet, and I think I had like an explosion that was one of my first explosions, which was a dust explosion. I think I even played it on here earlier, but I was so used to Call of Duty and making dust and go and like explosions that I just started out with that. And my art director at the time, he's like, "Hey, I really like this, but let's go away from the realism a bit and try something new." And I struggled with it for so long, but it just came down to color theory and just shapes. Just like going the stylized route, those are the fundamentals that are like insanely important. Is like, does the shape read? What is the shape? What is it? And does it read? And are the colors too? Is it too crazy? Are they too blown out? Are you using too many colors? Which I was doing. So I'm like, all right, stick to 3 colors tops. Make the shapes really nice and clean. Have them stand out. Have there be good contrast. It was literally just all the art fundamentals, and the timing, which is the animation fundamentals. So that was kind of the aha moment. Was like, take a step back, really pay attention to what the purpose of this effect is and why it's here. Like, what is it trying to convey? And that was definitely my aha moment.
And that kind of leads into what you were saying a second ago, or earlier in the presentation, where you're talking about like realism is kind of easier for you because like the answers are there. You can see what you're attempting to accomplish. So you understand how much primary or secondary or tertiary detail that your simulation should have. But when you're moving over and now the goal isn't immersion or realism, but it's now about impact or emotional reaction, you have to kind of change up what you're doing. Because if you just had a realistic dust hit when that goal happened, it'd be like, oh, there's dust. Like, who cares? But you want that player's reaction. You want their anticipation. You want to slap them in the face with like, this thing. And you also don't have the 32 million points on screen to be able to do all the tertiary vortex, spinning that you would want to do if you were doing like a big tornado in a feature film, right? So you have to focus on primary shapes and clean reads so that they get the picture without being inundated with noise, right?
Yeah. For example, like this dust right here, just super basic, just 2 colors, just the shadow and the light, and then compared to this, which was the one I was just talking about, super hyper real, or like a little more realistic than that last one I showed right before. So this was like just very fresh right out of Call of Duty into Rocket League, and then this was after a little time just kind of toning it back and making it fit in the world that you are working in, and that's so important. You'll start at a studio and they'll have a style guide, or maybe they won't have a style guide, and you have to kind of look dev. All of that just falls into like the fundamentals and paying attention to the world that you're working in.
Cool, thank you. So Kevin, you want to share a little
Sure.
tech moment in your career?
What's interesting to me is that I kind of approached it from the other end. Unreal and Houdini to some extent give you kind of these tools to do that are shortcuts, right? A lot of them, like something as simple as like blend modes in Photoshop. You have a blend mode in your materials, right? You can blend screen, you can blend your normals, you can do all that stuff. And what I started doing was digging into those nodes and kind of reverse engineering them, right? Because all that, when you go into the nodes, it's math, because it's the computer calculating how a pixel is shown on screen. And so I started to realize that, like, you just need a dot product in order to get a normal off of a surface, right? Like, and sometimes that's super helpful for materials, right? If you wanted to, say, make a 3D decal, you need to know the normals of the surfaces that it's projecting on, right? So you need to be able to figure out where your world normals are pointing, right? And being able to use math to then apply that to your texture is really handy. And so I was opening up all these nodes and trying to understand what they were doing, and just kind of taking them apart one by one. And that really helped me kind of level stuff up, because I realized that, like, I can take parts of these nodes, the things that are applicable to what I want to do, and put them in the material outside of these nodes to do my own wizardry in the shader, right? Like it doesn't have to be applied via, I don't know, a parallax occlusion mapping node, right? It can be, I just need the bump height and offset, and then I just need to add something into my UVs to move things around. So it was a little bit from the other side, because I got a lot of shortcuts, and then I kind of learned from those shortcuts how they got there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that's all I've got. So if you guys want to move on to your
you want to do demo reels?
Reels or interviews, or
yeah, we can talk about that stuff.
Just
right,
one
cool.
quick thing, something that you said, like reconstructing existing things. I think that was one of the most beneficial things for me. Is I would just take assets that somebody I looked up to, who I was working with, they made something really cool. I would literally just go and reverse engineer everything they did, and that helped me so much. So I think that's just important just to remember.
I did that a lot with like Houdini files, or just looking at Niagara systems that they have made. Because sometimes it's like some convoluted knowledge that you aren't even aware that you need.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh yeah, I just packed in my fucking emission, my depth, my motion vectors all in one. I'm like, oh, how'd you do that? Can you send me that file?
Yep.
So it's always nice to have coworkers that are willing to share their files.
Oh yeah, most of them are too.
Yeah.
As long as you ask, they are willing to impart as much information as they can.
Yeah, a lot of us are tech nerds who are very happy to share. So
yeah, it's one of the things I've been saying for years is nobody else in this world wants to talk to you about your passions. So when you can surround yourself with people who are willing to listen to you talk about surface normals and dot products and, you know, shaders, you're like, oh yeah, I'll talk all night long, right? Like someone's going to listen to me say these things, I'm in. Like, so which I think would be a good point that I just want to add to what you guys are saying, because you're about to talk about interviews and careers and demo reels and ways for people to do art tests and just improve their chances at getting where they want to go with less strife and time and whatever. And it leads into something that I think you guys, everybody can really benefit from. And we were talking about it backstage before we came out, and it was like not only relying on like your coworkers or your classmates or people on the internet and all these beautiful resources that you have access to, whether it's files made by Epic, like the content examples, or it's all the Houdini, the side effects guys have like an infinite amount of stuff that you can pick apart and see what's going on. But it's also about finding like a community or mentorship or stuff like that and making yourself like part of it. Like being able to have people that know or have done this stuff, be able to push you in the right direction, be able to guide you to those resources. A lot of times because we are introverted and we're at our desks all the time working, it can be a little bit more difficult to go out and make these relationships and find these people. But it's really something that a lot of you like people should like kind of consider, because you know, Kevin and I both have a very similar background coming out of school, which is that we had mentors that we met at Gnomon who saw in us like the opportunity to succeed and really provided us with a lot of direction and hand holding. And it's not that we weren't hardworking or we didn't have good work coming out of school, but our journey was much, much easier because the connections and community and the idea that we created some mutual respect with people doing what we wanted to do. And then they gave back to us in that way. So for instance, this is an opportunity when we have questions later to introduce yourselves. It's an opportunity to reach out to artists that you see online and ask them about stuff, because we were talking about we're nerds and we want to talk about it and we spend so much time obsessing. So when you see somebody doing something awesome, shoot them an email on ArtStation or wherever it is and say, I really like your work. I'm also a visual effects artist. Like, you know, would you mind checking out some of my work sometime, or giving me, you know, like hop on Discord and have a conversation for 10 minutes? And you'd be surprised how many heavy hitter people will take an unauthorized break in the middle of their workday to hop on the internet and share awesome information with a young student who's hungry enough to call them out and say, yo, I love your art. Teach me how you do it. They're like, someone's talking to me. And they're not just telling me my artwork sucks. I'm in this. All right, cool. So back to you guys, but it's piggybacking on what they're doing. Build your community, speak your dreams into an existence. And I think that I know for you, for a fact, Kevin and myself, that's what we did to get where we're at, is we just saw people doing what we wanted to do. And we did everything we could to get into their circle and learn from them and steal their knowledge. And I guess we did a good enough job to impress them. And then they gave us our opportunities, right? So don't just think that if you're really good sitting in your room that you're going to have those opportunities if people don't know you exist. So reach out and create a community. Next.
you kind of want to go into like how you actually got your first job? Like speaking of all those connections and all that, like
Yeah. So I went through Gnomon, right? And I originally was going through environments and going that route. And then similar to you, had the visual effects for games class later on in the term. Uh, and it kind of scratched that itch of like highly technical, but still artistic. Um, and it was games, and that was what I'm really interested in. And I was lucky in that my instructor gave us like just enough information to complete the task that we were given on a weekly basis, but also left room for kind of pushing for more, right? And that was something that I did every week, right? I tried to make sure that I uh, took that assignment and just went extra, right? And that helped me because a lot of these assignments, I mean, I later on went to teach the class, so I kind of know these assignments. Um, they're meant to build up your understanding, right? They start at the ground level, and they get you an understanding of the concepts and the fundamentals and where you can build from there. Uh, but a lot of them you can take and push further, right? You can gain a deeper understanding of the timing, like the animation timing, easing in and easing out of effects, using your curves in your particle systems to great effect, so that your particles kind of move in a little bit more lifelike manner. They have some kind of animation to them that makes them interesting, right? Um, and so I tried to push that further and further every week. And I had 2 terms under the same instructor, and it was basically a 6-month long art test. And after that, he was like, "Hey, you should apply to Respawn. Like, we're working on a title. I'd be great for you to interview." Um, and I applied and interviewed with the team, the effects team, the art directors, the design directors, and they liked me enough to hire me on.
super cool. Like so, just direct connection gets you the job. Um, Mine was a little different. Um, I I decided to make like a bunch of different demo reel pieces, and I was just gonna go out to a bunch of events, game events, and if I saw a dev, I was just gonna go up to them, and if they were working on a stylized game, I was gonna show them my stylized reel. If they were working on like a Call of Duty-esque game, I was gonna show them that reel. And that's kind of what happened. It was like a E3 convention here in LA, and I decided to go to one of these free events, and I saw this guy with a Call of Duty dev shirt on, and I just walked up to him, just phone in hand, ready to go. And fortunately for me, he was a little intoxicated, so he was really easy to get along with. I showed him my reel. It was like a tank shooting another tank and exploding, and he's like, "Dude, this is awesome." A couple weeks later, I got a call from HR department at Sledgehammer, and they're like, "Are you interested?" Yes, absolutely. So it just goes to show, like, what you put out, you're definitely going to get in. Um, just whether it's you going really hard on your work in front of a teacher who has all these connections already, or you just going out there and like talking to the community and just making sure they know that you're hungry, and it will follow suit. So yeah,
Putting that work in is what pays off. Because
absolutely.
whether or not like the people that you ask for help are looking to hire, they always know people who are hiring. Uh, and that's one of those soft skills like networking and making connections with people. That's super helpful. Uh, but like we were saying earlier, like we're all 3D nerds, right? Everybody loves to talk about their artwork, their process, what they're working on, how they got there. Um, I mean, hell, that's what we're doing right now.
Yeah,
Um, and so connecting with people on that level is great. Uh, but at the same time, you want to show them that you're hungry for work, right? You understand your concepts. You're looking for more information. You're trying to get better at your craft, and especially with real-time effects being so in demand, because there are so few of us. There's always going to be somebody looking to hire. I mean, I don't know how many times I've referenced other people to for hires, or found out that those people that I were referencing weren't available because they'd already been hit up by whichever studio for their work. So it's one of those things that was, you get in what you put in.
Do you also get a bunch of emails on LinkedIn
Yes.
for hires?
Yes.
Yeah, VFX is incredibly understaffed, so definitely a good choice if this is the field you want to get into.
Yeah.
Um,
You want to talk about reels?
yeah,
Because
let's
reels
do
are
it.
super important.
They are. Like I said earlier, I made different reels depending on what studio or who I was talking to, and I think that's incredibly important, is to find the studios that you want, find the games you want to work on, and craft your demo reels to fit that world, because it'll blow them away. Like Call of Duty, they saw that one tank explosion, like, this is exactly what we're working on, like, you're a perfect fit. So I think it's super important to make sure your reels are crafted specifically for who you're trying to go for.
Yeah, it's a really big point to what you want to work on, because you're going to be doing these effects for minimum 40 hours a week, every week, right? You don't want to hate what you're doing, and there's a demand for effects artists, as we've repeatedly said, right? And that means that you should really target what you want to work on, and that may change over time. That's what happens, but maybe you wanted to work on like a Blizzard game. If you wanted to work on Diablo, you really like their like gritty gothic effects, right? You can target that and make sure that that's the work that you're putting out there, so that the people who see that are like, oh, cool, we could use that in here. Like, let's get in touch. So that's always crucial, and that was kind of what part of what I did.
Yeah.
I wanted a little bit more sci-fi of a reel, some not so sci-fi pieces, but it was a lot of stuff in there that was emissive.
Emissive is good. Emissive makes things look good. Which I will go to say, a lot of things that we look for in reels when we're looking for somebody to hire is, we already know that emissive stuff looks really good. And if you put it on a black background, pretty much anything looks good on a black background. So I highly suggest just even putting in the little bit of effort to put some kind of world and put your effects in that world. It can be basic. It doesn't have to be anything crazy, as long as it's something.
Yeah, context is key.
Yeah.
It's because we've talked about collaboration. We've talked about how all of our stuff gets integrated into the game. Your effects are always going to have context. So showing that you understand that you need this context to sell the effect is huge. Even if it's like, say you needed to blow up a car, or this explosion here, like, you want to make sure that you add some camera shake, right? And maybe you have a model in there that's not maybe a fully fleshed out model, but it's something that indicates the context of that explosion, right? And so that's part of the fundamentals, I think, that I look for in a reel. Is
Same.
you got to make sure that you understand kind of the artistic fundamentals that we were talking about earlier, with your shape design, your colors, your timing, everything that we've been kind of harping on. And then, I mean, later on, I feel like later on during the interview is when I ask the technical stuff, because usually you want to make sure that somebody has a really good eye for the effects that you need, right? And that comes across in your reel, because it's the easiest to show in the visual sense, and the tech stuff just comes afterwards.
Just a couple more notes on like what I think makes a good reel. So don't put your R&D stuff, don't put test stuff. We had one person who we were like looking at a bunch of people's reels, and we saw this one person, their very first piece that they had in it was super good. And if they just had that one piece, we would have hit them up and like got them an interview process. But then it was just followed by a bunch of really bad stuff, just stuff that wasn't done. It was just testing phase, and that was enough to like deter us from seeking that person out. So leave your bad stuff out. Just don't put them anywhere in there, and make sure you're putting your best pieces, your best foot forward.
Even if it's relatively simple, because I think a lot of things can get overly complicated with effects. right? You can always add more. Like you can add more dust, you can add more explosions, you can add more lasers, whatever. But the simple things that show you understand the concepts are equally important because they really communicate that you understand the fundamentals are important and that's what you're working on, right? They may show that you may need like a little bit more work on it, but a lot of it is also showing your art director and your lead how much they have to guide you and how much they can kind of let you do whatever it is, whatever task that you're being given, right? Because such a big part is making sure that you can take a task and see it through to completion. And they can give you some guidelines along the way, but making sure that you have a good eye for it. You're working on your fundamentals to show that you can put together a final product that, with their help, is going to be great, right? So you don't need to focus on this one or like a fantastic piece that shows like the extent of it, and then you realize that your scope is too large, and it kind of comes off looking terrible, right?
Yeah.
I've had that happen countless times where I've tried to go too far and had to reel it back, and it doesn't quite fit the feel of what I wanted to convey, right? So hitting those easy, maybe not easy, because the fundamentals don't really get easy, but hitting the fundamental notes and making sure that you are achieving your goal, even in a small scope, is good for real, right?
And one of the things that like kind of like reiterates what you guys are talking about is something that I've heard throughout my career, and it was a good buddy of mine who's like high up in tech art at a game studio, but I'm not going to name drop him. And he always said, when I'm looking for people, he's like, I would always rather teach an artist how to program than teach a programmer how to artist, right? And his whole point of that was like, I can't teach you how to I don't have the time to help you make things look good, right? That's the skill that you already have to come to the table with, understanding how to like create something visually appealing. I can sit down you and show you shortcuts and how to optimize and, teach you a little bit of this and that. But at the end of the day, from a real standpoint, from a student standpoint, getting people's attention is showing them that you are the artist part of the VFX, right? You're not a VFX programmer or a VFX tool user or you're an artist. And so you have to be able to tell a story and create something that's visually compelling. And if you downscope that, right, and you just make one thing look really good, then you're in a huge advantage. I've seen that in like modeling reels as well, right, where one thing is absolute perfection and you're like, they got the job, and then you see the next thing and you're like, oh no, like I can't trust this person.
Right.
So showing that you're an artist and a designer and a storyteller is substantially more important than flexing with 5,000 projects, or tons of complicated things that maybe other people can't do. um, so I also want to mention the thing that you said, Nova, that is super, super important that I've seen over and over and over again, and I still see it to this day. And it's amazing that we're still seeing it in people's reels and they're wondering why they're not getting callbacks. And it's the test stuff. It's the barrel with fire with the black background. And no matter how good that sim is, it doesn't really matter. And we had a talk here probably 5 years ago from one of the visual effects supervisors at ILM. And when he came down here and was showing his work and breakdowns of the things that he was doing, one of the points that he made at the end when he was talking to students about, if you want a job at ILM, hit me up, but here's my advice. He said exactly the same thing you did. And he's like, give me one shot that shows you understand visual effects, like give it context, give it story, give it all the elements that I expect to see. And that's all I need. I don't need any of your tests. I don't care about all that stuff. Put all of it, all your work into one thing that shows me you understand what we do as storytellers, and you've got a job.
Yeah,
But
if you could upload your tests and stuff like that to your ArtStation or Vimeo if you want, but what you actually send out should be that one really good piece.
Oh yeah, always do tests, always make more art and push yourself and define things, but don't think, I guess the point I'm just trying to make is like, don't think that the stuff that you're doing for tests or learning new tools or whatever, because it turned out okay, is like art for your reel.
Right. Yeah, that's super important. And also, don't keep your reels a little short. If they're super long, like we're not going to watch all of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty nice to have it just like kind of quick pace to like make sure that you were seeing, especially because I mean, all go back to what I was saying earlier with games. A lot of it's about interacting with your character, right? Like, and making sure that you feel like you're moving your character around and doing the actions in game, because that's how you immerse yourself. And that means that our effects have to be responsive, which means that they're short-lived, and they should live in 5-second, 10-second clips on your reel, right? Because that's how you have to convey it in game. If it's a vista or if it's like a cinematic, sure, I understand a little bit longer. You need to make sure that people see like the work you put into it. But especially for gameplay stuff and like attacks or some kind of like ambient effects or reload effects or projectiles, things like that. Like that, it's a quick pace that you want to set so that people see your stuff, understand, because we can always rewind, right? Like if we like what we see, we'll rewind, watch it again, and make sure that we like the smaller details that you have in there. But if your overall shapes are there, it's going to read in that 5 to 10 second clip. So putting a what, like 6 or 7 of those together in one place in a reel is a nice short glimpse of like who you are as an artist and what you bring to the table. And it's a great way to make sure that you don't have the artist looking at your reel just kind of like drift off to the side. Because I mean, that's what I tried with my reel, right? I tried to keep it short so that people understood that I knew what the gameplay had to be like and what was involved and what my time frame was.
Yeah, I try to keep mine under a minute.
Yep.
Like my student reel. Something I'll like reference back to is collaboration. Like you guys have a upper hand on everybody else trying to get into real-time effects because you have not only the connections, but you have your classmates that are doing other things that you can. If you don't want to model a environment to put your effect on, like you probably have someone that did a really dope environment, and now you just get to go in there and put effects on it because the person who's doing the environment's going to want that because it livens it up, and you get a solid piece of 3D that you get to just liven up, and it goes a really long way having like solid pieces like that in your demo reel.
Yeah, and I'd add to that just, because I can't stop talking. um, that even if you don't have the scope, scale, or timing to be able to collaborate with individuals on bigger projects like that, you do have the advantage of things like mega scans. You have the advantage of motion capture. Kevin was just talking about characters and like grounding effects and making sure that there's that. Maybe you don't have time to rig and model and animate a character and hook it up to a player control system inside of Unreal just so you can show off him getting hit with a force blast, right? But you do have the ability to go get a clip of mocap data off the internet and import it onto the skeleton inside of Unreal and time your effects in something contextual to show off that you understand how these things are actually working. And they're not just dust, they're not just distortion effects, they're not just water and debris. They're an aspect of the story of the evolving environment and experience. And so if you show that experience and that knowledge of it, and I think that's what the man from ILM was saying was, like, show me that you understand what we really do, and I'll bring you in and you can come along for the journey, right? But like if you're just thinking that what we do is hit simulate fire, and that's what a lot of people kind of I think miss the mark on, that you guys are like really hammering. And I just wanted to like kind of reiterate it because it's such an important topic that so many people who are talented, incredibly talented with Houdini and Unreal and all this other stuff, they do cool stuff, but it's just like it sits flat, right? And you said, if your work is good, we're going to watch it twice, right? If your work is bad, it's going to get turned off halfway through, right? Or if it's average, if it's just good but it's average, you're going to get turned off halfway through. And if it's bad, everyone in the studio is going to see it 10 times, right? So that's how it works. You're going to get twice for good work, half for average work, and 10 times for every single person in the studio, including the delivery guy, is going to see your reel 10 times. So don't be in that third category.
I mean, I did that for my reel in terms of getting like Milmoe assets, right? Because that's super helpful. Just utilizing all those resources around to contextualize everything also shows that you are a little bit more tech savvy, right? Like you understand how to get animations imported, put it on a skeleton, go into your animations and put an anim notify in there to make sure that effects trigger at the right time, right? So it shows a little bit of initiative in that sense, right? Because you can give an artist like that a kind of just an open task to like figure out how to do this, and they'll take care of it, right? And that's not everybody, uh, but if you can showcase that, that's great because people are looking for it, right? You don't want to have to babysit the people who you're hiring. So making sure that people have that aptitude and that initiative uh, is a huge bonus.
That's so true, man. Like you really don't want to babysit. Like if you start at a new studio, you're gonna get the help you need. But if you're just always sitting there waiting for the help, it it doesn't look good. And a lot of times, if you're on like a contract for like a few months, if you're not the one initiating, um, asking for help or asking for tasks, that contract time comes up and there's a good chance you're not going to actually stay at that studio because we like nobody wants to babysit, right? Everybody's busy doing their own thing. We'd love to help, and when you come with questions, hopefully you did some research yourself. You don't just say, hey, I don't know what I'm doing, help me with this. You say, hey, I tried this, I tried changing this from like sRGB and checking it off and it still looks like shit. Like, what am I doing wrong? If you come with some some prior research or just prior like looking up stuff yourself and trying to figure it out, like if somebody comes up to me and tells me that, I'm like, oh, that's cool that you tried all these things, but this is where you're going wrong, and I know exactly how to help them when they tell me what they've already tried, instead of sitting there like hands up there like I don't know what you've done so far. What there's it could be a million things. Now you're going to take a bunch of my time to figure something out, and you didn't even spend like even 30 minutes just trying to figure out like different options. So
I think that's one of the things that I try and harp on interviews, because interviews are the time for technical questions generally and like like a personality fit, right? Uh, and that's a great time to ask people how they got to where they are in terms of how they made the stuff in their reel, right? How they worked with others if they had previous experience, right? Like if you collaborated with a friend on your reel, uh, and it's a great way to figure out if you sought out that information yourself, right? Because if somebody asks you, oh hey, how did you figure out like how did you do this? I'll go back to parallax occlusion mapping on your decals. Like what did you do for that? And you like, oh well, I went into the content examples. I took apart their decals. I looked at it. I found out why these height maps worked. I made one in Photoshop or in Substance, and then I tried out my own, and then I put it on this projectile so that when it hits, it spawns this decal. It looks great. That shows me that you put in the time to do your own research, right? You went into the resources you have available. You can always ask people questions, right? Like if you were to say, "Oh, I asked my teacher and he gave me direction on this," right? Like that also shows you took feedback. Um, but it's a great time to showcase that you put in work on your own time and to understand your craft, and to further yourself and your understanding of it. And it's something that I try and push like every time I interview somebody. That's like that comes up.
dude, 100%. One thing that my coworker Lee will kick my butt if I don't remember to mention to you guys is don't use tutorials on your reels. Like we have seen these tutorials a million times. So if one of your pieces is literally a rip of one of that, we're instantly just not interested. So like watch tutorials, follow them, do whatever you got to do, but then add your add your flavor to it and make it your own. So that's a big part of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I mean I've seen one explosion tutorial in like 60 reels maybe.
Oh yeah. I think I know exactly which one you're
Yeah.
talking about. Too.
So it's like we've all done those tutorials too, right? Like we know what you do in those, and we know like the settings that this guy told you to put in the Houdini sim, right? Uh, so we know how it comes out. Uh, And that's great. Like Nova said, tutorials are amazing at getting you to understand the concepts, get through it to get a working result, and see what you can achieve given these like this input. Uh, but it says a lot to take that knowledge and test yourself by doing it your way, right? Doing it for something that you want to see come to life, because that, I mean, that goes back to showing initiative, right? Like it shows that you're gonna take that knowledge and apply it, and you can kind of problem solve all the things that went wrong when you tried to apply it differently than when this guy told you the exact values that you need.
Yeah, and I think importantly to what you're saying is that if your reel is tutorials, you're not ready to be a pro, because there's not going to be a tutorial when they come to you, like you're dealing with Nova, where you're, doing all this photorealism in Call of Duty franchises, and then you come over and you're way out of your element. And there's no tutorial for like, all right, I need a Phoenix with sparks. Like it's 3 seconds long when a car scores a goal.
Right.
Right. So you can't go online and go, oh, well, how do I make this effect? Because you're not going to find it. So you have to have that, the tutorials are great to learn the information. It's great to learn new techniques and tools and tricks, and maybe even some aesthetic stuff that you didn't even think about, like the way to think about effects and design effects. But then you really need to go in and like kind of understand those component parts, those base components, or what we keep calling fundamentals, so that when you get a job and they go, oh, I see this thing you did, it's really awesome, I don't want that. What I want is you to do that, something that quality, but completely different. Because I think that both of you guys are probably like, you blew up a tank and Call of Duty says, I want a tank blowing up. And you were doing all sorts of cool magic spells and other stuff. And they said, I can see this in the Star Wars universe, right? So they saw that. But then when you got there, I'm sure you weren't like, oh, you're going to need to do an underwater thing with like, occluded clouds and a volumetric effect. And like, you're like, I don't know what the hell any of this is for. But because you kind of took it to that kind of core knowledge, that you were able to problem solve and art direct and iterate and ask the proper questions. And I think it's something that people want instantaneous. They want that instant gratification, that get rich quick scheme. So they go, if I watch 5 tutorials and I know these things, I have a reel. But also be considerate that when you're going and you're doing real-time visual effects, or even, rendered visual effects inside of the film industry, you're not going there because someone's going to pay you to run software. You're going there because you're a storyteller, an artist, and a technician rolled up into a ball. And so you have to be able to be adaptable and creative and a problem solver. And you're not going to get that from just modeling a donut. There's one person in the world that's got a job modeling a donut, and it's the dude who did the donut tutorial.
True. The problem solving is a big thing. That's something that I think is one of the main character traits I look for in somebody coming in for an interview, right? Because a lot of the job is problem solving, because there's very few times when you go to make like an interesting effect that it's ever been done before. There's techniques that have been done before, but there's not a lot of times when that series of events has ever occurred. So you're usually making something pretty novel, and that comes with its own problems, right? You always run into an issue where uh, I'll speak to it from a technical side. Um, I was using Sequencer, which is how we built some cinematics or how you build cinematics in Unreal, and I was having issues where attaching objects were teleporting around, right? But we didn't really have the time to make our own custom code to make sure that we attach things. So you can figure out that blueprints, you can parent places and make them work a little bit nicer, right? Like you can do, say you needed something to spin, but you couldn't rely on your keyframes in Sequencer to make that object spin. Uh, you could instead make a blueprint that has rotation movement on it, and then parent that blueprint to the joint, right? So there's all different ways that you can approach a lot of these problems, because they've never really been approached in that way before, in a lot of cases. And you just have to have that problem-solving mindset of like, oh, well, this doesn't work because of technical limitations, or this doesn't work because it doesn't look good. How else can we do it?
And then it also comes down to just knowing the right people to talk to, because a lot of the times you'll run into these issues that there's a really good chance somebody else has ran into it, and building those connections with people you work with just makes that process a lot easier. You don't feel like you're bothering somebody to go ask for help. Like, you know this person, you've worked with this person, and you come with them to the same mentality of like, hey, I tried this and I tried this and I've done a bunch of things and none of them are working and I don't want to waste any more time. Does anybody else like know what is causing this? And a lot of the times somebody has seen it, and if they haven't, they're going to spend some time to help you figure it out. So for me, that's crucial because I'm a little less on the technical side. I am more now, and that just comes naturally. Like, art was the main thing I got into, but like the technical side is something you can pick up. Uh, but that was really crucial in my early days, was finding the right people to help me out in pinches like that.
So how you guys feeling? It's been a couple of minutes here.
Yeah, I know.
Do you have some stuff that you want to impart on everybody, or you wanted me to move over into the Q&A of the evening?
One quick thing.
All right,
that
go for it.
Nobody told me, but people that refer you get referral bonuses. So they are trying to refer you. So if you are good and they like your work, they will go out of their way to refer you because they get money. So,
and I will lead back to, actually a question from chat and something that we said earlier about the network, right? This constant thing of like mentorship and networks and communities. So one of the questions in chat that someone asked is like, where can I find someone networking in LA? What events, right? And I think that like events wise, it's a hard one because like you said, E3, it's a good one. Video game convention. GDC is a good one. I think it's free. That's in San Francisco though, coming up actually in a couple weeks. So professional events, cool, but it doesn't have to be in person. Right. It doesn't have to be like at a place where the pros are. If you guys have been to Polycount or you've been to the Real-time Visual Effects forums, or even on ArtStation, like I said earlier, you can network by just going on to someone's ArtStation page saying, hey, this is badass. Like, I love your work, man. And then DMing them and being like, yo, I really like what you do and I want to do what you do. Can you give me some tips? And I'll tell you right now, like, people who've approached me in my career, right, both before I was an instructor and before I was a mentor and any of that stuff, who had the audacity to be interested in me, right? Like, seriously, like, they were willing to be like, I think what you do is cool. Can you help? And those people were willing to put in the effort. I did anything I could to help them. Like, because I was like, oh man, they're just like me. They're hungry. They want it. They're putting in this work. They're showing me their stuff. And so they're going to go out. And even if there isn't the bonuses, which there are, for employees, not random people off the street, you can't walk into like EA and be like, I know a dude.
Right. Well, I mean, we're still not going to refer somebody that we don't think is good for the job.
No, I know.
So
I'm just making a joke. Obviously you have to be good for it, but it's like things like, but you can get good if you have someone who cares about you trying to help you get there, right?
Oh yeah.
It's very hard on your own. So the question is kind of like, how do I network? How do I find the community? How do I do these things? And it's like, you just do it. I mean, there's no easy way in, like just like learning visual effects, just like learning math, just like learning how to be a better artist. Building a network is also a skill. You called them soft skills earlier. And that's the truth, is like, but it's easy enough because the world is so connected now to find the knowledge in the tutorials and the communities, but also make yourself known. Go on that website and introduce yourself and say, hi, I'm new to this. I really like visual effects. I've been doing 3D for a year. I think I want to be a real-time game artist. And you're on a community forum with 30,000 people who are, 40,000 people who are real-time visual effects artists or studying real-time visual effects art. And you're saying, hi, I exist. People want to help me. And some dude will drop a link to a post that you didn't know existed with 1,000 resources and say, read all this shit and then call me back. And you just got like your entire, like 2 years of your life is like taken, you've just like booked it, right? With all this knowledge and shit you could do. So, so the answer to the question hopefully makes sense is like build the community you want. Join communities, go to events, talk to people, hero worship a little bit, but don't be weird and creepy. Right?
That's a big one.
Don't be weird and creepy. Don't be so creepy, y'all.
To add to that a little bit, besides the forums and all that, if you want a more, immediate connection, there's also Discords. Like, there's Discord servers for the Real-time VFX forums. There's Discord servers for Houdini. There's Discord servers for all sorts of things where you can ask questions to these people, and they'll respond almost immediately. And to go back to what Nova was talking about as well, if you come with an interesting problem, right? Because a lot of what we do is problem solving. People will get interested. And if you pique somebody's interest about a problem that you have, they're going to help you because they get invested. So doing your research, trying stuff out on your own, running into problems, trying to solve them, and then going to get help is a great way to have people just network with you and then remember you, right?
I think that problem-solving thing. Oh, sorry.
The presenter is apologizing for the question. It's great. We're doing it right.
I just wanted to say quickly. I think the whole problem-solving aspect of it can maybe deter people and make it seem like, oh, this might be too complicated. But there's just so many resources out there, and there's so many people willing to help, like you said. So I don't think that should be a deterrent. If effects is something you're really interested in, the problem-solving aspect of it is quite interesting, actually.
All right, so we're going to move over into Q&A. I think we got a question in the audience over here. So you already got the microphone. Well, we're ahead of schedule.
Hi, thanks. Great panel. I have a question about using AI for visual effects. There's some companies like monsters, aliens, zombies, blah, blah, that are starting to use AI to help out with some of the backgrounds and just make the job easier. Have you guys heard about that, or is that like a thing that that's on your radar yet?
Not for me.
Yeah, not for me.
I haven't worked on it too much because a lot of it, AI probably needs a little bit more training on. There's always being able to use AI as a tool, right? And there hasn't a lot of, like I was saying earlier, that a lot of the problems we run into aren't problems that people have run into before. And so there's no real way to train that model. And that means that you can't get a great solution out of AI, at least immediately. And that'll probably take time. We may get to a place where they can help us out.
Yeah, I think it's always going to be that, like helping us out potentially. Like AI is doing like really good at creating static images, but real-time effects, it's just so many moving parts. And actually, hopefully one day it'll get to the point where it can help us place some of the things that we don't want to do, like sparks and
I think the more ambient stuff, like the kind of more of the it's not busy work, but like the stuff that takes time, it'd be great to have help with, right? Optimization, stuff where we have to make sure that particle systems work within a certain amount of milliseconds. Like if we can, that's more on the technical side, and I can imagine that coming into play a little bit sooner, because that's something where we can, like, you can get an iteration back, like kicked back to you from an AI, and then you can kind of proofread it visually, make sure that it's okay, and then kick it back or put that in.
Yeah, and just to follow up on their question, like AI comes in so many different flavors, and it's been in our industry and our tools for decades now, and it's just now become a hot button topic, right? But when you really look at it, like pretty much everybody's using an AI sharpening algorithm, AI element removal. Like, there's so many of our tools and so many of our software that are AI driven, whether that's asset organization or whatever. Like you're talking about, like I know that Ubisoft did a presentation in GDC probably 6 years ago where they were talking about building Bolivia, the fake Bolivia for Ghost Recon, and they wrote an entire AI system that was doing like QC work for their environment collisions. So like overnight when nobody was there, the AI was just running around bumping into shit and falling through the floor and making a log of all the things that the people had to fix the next day, right? So we're already leveraging this stuff, and we have forever. It's become a bigger topic because, it's generating a picture. But when you're talking about real time, yeah, if you train AI to make a water splash and say, now give me an image sequence of a water splash, that can happen. But you can't, AI is not fast enough for it to be generating a real-time visual effect that's interacting with collisions and player motions and all that. It wouldn't be there. It would be on a generative image in the pipeline somewhere. Maybe 5 years or 6 years or 10 years now with supercomputers. But the thing I think is that if you're creative, you're storyteller, you're technical, and you're someone in these positions, you shouldn't be scared about these tools. They're the natural evolution, the same conversations we had when scanning became a thing, the same thing that happened when 3D printing became a thing and ZBrush became a thing and PTEX became a thing. And we can go back 20 years on technological innovation where everybody freaked out and said it's the end and chicken littled, right? But if you're good at what you do, then they're just tools. And so, you know, I've got 26 years of Photoshop experience, and I didn't like throw down my tablet pin when they brought out like the smart remove brush, right? Where it's like, oh my God, all my masking techniques are shit now. Like, no, we didn't, all the texture artists didn't walk off the planet when smart materials happened in Substance Designer, right? So the thing is like, we'll adapt and we'll build those tools. And here's what really needs to be said about this whole thing. If the job gets easier and we have better systems to make art, then the guys with the wallets are going to expect us to do 5,000 times more work. So if we think that it's going to get so easy that we don't have a job, what's really going to happen is we're just going to have to do 10 times more work because the tools are better. Because that's what's happened through this entire process. Oh, you can AI generate a character? Cool. I want 5,000 of them. And so now you're doing 5,000 characters a week instead of one. So that's really where it's at. But I don't think the visual effects thing that it's there yet. But it's there, just not replacing humans, and I don't think it ever will.
It's much more of a tool.
Yeah.
It's just going to become another shelf tool that we can use if you equate it to something in Houdini. I think it's more so just something. It's another thing that you have to quality control as a person. Like, there's no way you can use your years of reference of knowing the natural world, and you can't really train, and I don't know, you can't really train an AI effectively on that in a short time span. That would take a while. So maybe in the future we'll get some help, but I don't think it'll ever replace.
Yeah.
All right, we got any next question?
Hi. Just a quick question is like, if you guys have been in a situation where the visual effects was affecting the frame rates, and do you guys have to like deal with situation where you have to optimize it or like just drop it straight out?
Usually optimize. There's a lot of different approaches for it, whether it be how you made your material, like changing materials from translucent to masked. You save on instructions. Whether maybe it's how many sprites you're spawning. You can cut down on the amount. There's a lot of things like that where you have to kind of art direct your particles. So you make sure that your behavior and your materials are working in tandem and they're not just tanking performance.
Yeah, I think LODs also play a huge role. So when you first start, you're probably going to make over budget effects, and that's okay because there are people that their jobs are to test the frame rate, and they'll come up to you and be like, hey, these effects are a little too expensive. Or some companies will give you some really like intricate tools that you can test yourself and make sure you're not hitting over budget. But as time goes by, you'll develop these just kind of intuition of like how to go about making a performant effect really early on. And yeah, LODs play a huge role. The types of masking and translucency or not, like all these play a huge role, and it's something we're always thinking about. At a certain point, you're just not even thinking about it because you just know what to do. But yeah, for sure, performance is always a sore topic sometimes.
Okay, I got a question from the gram here. How do you overcome that feeling when you hit a wall in your work?
I curl up and cry.
Just like we rehearsed.
Usually, I don't know, for me, I try and approach it differently. Either you start from scratch and try something that's not quite the first approach that you did, or you look at something cool that you think you want to replicate and try with that. Like it's more about maybe getting a different perspective or different reference and going from that direction, so that you're not stuck against the wall that you're hit currently. You're coming from a different angle.
Yeah, I hit a lot of walls working on like Rocket League goal explosions because, like I said, there wasn't much concept all the time. So a lot of the times it's trying to come up with new things, and it's always just about kind of like stepping away, looking as much as reference as you can find that you like, Another thing that really helps me is just like going to talk to my coworkers and be like, "Hey man, you seen any cool movies lately, or any cool shows, or any cool anime clips that have dope effects in them?" And I have a coworker that'll just send me just so much reference. I'm like, "Thank you for that info dump." Like stepping away and talking to people and building actually a visual folder of just a bunch of reference that you collect over the years is really important.
Um, with like real-time engines just getting better and better, have you noticed any like merging of like film and game techniques are happening in effects? For example, like the reason I ask is I know Insomniac, where even though it's not effects related, they started looking into muscle sims to get the proper deformation for Miles Morales for the PC, and then even Stranger Things, they started using flow maps for a texture. So I was wondering if you started noticing anything in game effects as far as film and um,
Star Wars guy.
There's there's a variety of different things that you have to do to kind of approach the cinematic feel, and a lot of it starts with the same process, right? Like if you need to make explosions, fire, dust, debris, um, a lot of the times you're starting with the sim. You're getting a nice render out. Uh, we just process the data a little bit differently. So for us, the sim and that part of it, instead of going to comp and then going through coloring and all that, uh, we'll get it into engine in the right format, usually a flipbook if it's a simulation, right? And we'll build the shaders, we'll do all that ourselves, but like make sure it works with the blueprint and everything. So there's kind of a divergence of workflow there. Um, Although specifically Houdini has been really nice recently for building tools towards games that have leveraged its workflow that they've been using in films and commercials. So it's becoming nicer on the tool side, um, but it's still kind of two different paths for that asset to go.
Yeah, and I've also noticed this becoming more common, but a lot of sets now for movies and TV shows are actually just completely made in Unreal Engine, and I've seen real-time effects actually play a role in that with fluid sims because they're making it. It's not really there yet for games because it's not incredibly performant, but for like a movie or something, making a fluid sim and just putting it in the background of a set. So it's so crazy how much you can do with VFX. Even real time effects in TV shows and movies, like that's a thing. So
I think it's also almost going the other way, honestly, because a lot of real-time effects techniques and workflows have kind of gone back and influenced because everybody wants really quick feedback, right? Like you want to see your interaction and your influence immediately, which is part of what drew me to real-time effects. Uh, and that instantaneous feedback allows you to get more and more iterations out, which is so valuable for pre-render because you don't want to waste time on 20 different shitty looking renders when you could have one really nice one, right? And you get the movement you want, you get everything. Um, so a lot of that information is going back to the film pre-rendered aspect as well. So it's kind of a highway in that respect.
Hi, I had a question for Nova. You said you originally were like a VFX artist for like cinema, and then you transferred into real-time effects. I was wondering because I also am like in that kind of pipeline, but half my reel would be like Houdini. What would you say or like have advice for if like you know the reel was like a half real time effects, half Houdini? Would that deter you? Would you say to like remove like some or?
um, I don't know if I'd remove it if it's really cool. A, a lot of effects artists that started in movies are trying to transfer over to games, just because like that quick iteration process and not having to wait so long for a sim. So I think the Houdini knowledge that you have, if you do decide to get into games, is incredibly strong. Houdini is so prevalent in video games, especially if you're working in Unreal Engine, because Epic Games and Side Effects, they work together to create these tools that can go straight from Houdini into Unreal. Um, I if you're trying to get a games job and you made a really cool sim in Houdini, absolutely put that in there. Like, especially if you have the sim in Unreal Engine and it's doing some cool stuff, you can show a process of how you made the sim. And like on the side while your real-time effects is playing, you can show on the side your Houdini sim. Um, no, I don't think you should disclude it, or definitely include it. Yeah.
I've seen a few reels with that, and it's good to know that you can transfer that skill set, right? Because that's also part of making sure that you can match that visual, and it shows that you have an eye for it, and it's an important skill to have.
Yeah, making sims is it's super important. Like there are libraries where you can buy sims, or being able to just make it on the fly is such a cool talent to have on your team. Like we had a guy come from ILM and he was making some of the coolest sims on Call of Duty, and it took him a little while to like get used to the real time side of things, but he already had the artistic eye and the technical know how. It was not so difficult to train him.
Yeah, and to piggyback that, and then we're going to wrap it for the night. But to piggyback your question, at the end of the day, every single person in those industries are visual effects artists first, and then the real time versus film versus stylized. There was a question online about stylized visual effects as well. Is just applying your knowledge of the same thing we've been talking about all night, which is motion and color and shape and storytelling, to in the case of real time hyper optimized performant effects. You're not trying to make something that looks worse or more simple when you're building a game effect. You're just working within the limitations of the engine that you have, and that engine could be different at every studio. You're working in Unreal, it might have X, Y, or Z issues with different aspects, and in another game engine might have a different element that it doesn't do well. Like maybe Unreal does translucency really well, but then this other engine does it really poorly. So now you have to change up your effect. But the point is the simulation or your After Effects knowledge or any other tool that you're using along your pipeline to make the effect is kind of irrelevant in the grand scheme of things, I guess. Meaning, like, if you do a cool thing in Houdini, awesome. If you do a cool thing in Photoshop, cool. If you can do it in Modo or Cinema 4D or Maya or any other tool because you can control something in a way that makes it appealing, then the next step is learning the shader tricks and the flipbook tricks and the performant tricks and the stuff that you'd have to do, just like compositing and layers and alembic caching and all this other stuff would be things that you would learn in a film workflow, right? And so it's two sides to the same coin. You can either be an effects artist or you can't. And then after that, it's where you want to go. So like both of these guys who are real-time effects people could take their knowledge of Houdini, take their knowledge of motion, and walk right into a commercial or film house and have a very, it's not necessarily easy, but a fairly speedy transition into delivering good-looking, high-quality effects for a completely different entertainment industry. Because they're effects artists first. And so every student I've ever worked with here who's been like, I want to do effects, but I want to do real-time effects, the advice I always give them is go effects track first and learn how to be a really badass effects artist, then worry about getting it into engine, kind of like what you were saying earlier, right? Like make the sim, build the assets, then hook it up, and then learn the performance stuff, learn the tricks, learn the tech. But first you have to be able to make a fireball actually even exist before you worry about whether or not it's in Unreal or if it's in Nuke, right? So that should hopefully give you a little bit of confidence in just focusing on your art and your storytelling and the aesthetic values that you're worried about, and then not so much about, are you an Unreal master? Because you might get your first job and not even be at Unreal. And, and I was fortunate enough to know some people at Riot that I got to go there for a week and talk with some of their visual effects people. And the entire thing that I was there for was a presentation on all these visual effects being done in just Photoshop and After Effects. Like just building imagery and then just doing After Effects tweaks and then applying those into shaders in the game engine. And some of the stuff looked like they were Houdini sims. Like they were stylized, but you were like, oh no, they totally simulated that thing. And you're like, nope, it's just adjusting levels and color corrections and then applying that to a shader as an alpha that's pushing emission and emissives and it's pushing whatever. And you're like, whoa, this is crazy. You did that with like 3 filters in After Effects and Photoshop. So if you can make it look good, it is good, right? There we go. All right, guys, thank you so much for coming out. I hope you guys learned some stuff. I want to thank Kevin and Nova for coming out. Both of them work from home, and some of them aren't even local, so they made a big trip up here. So if we could get a round of applause for them, I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Stay classy, San Diego.
Hey, thank you guys for coming out. Honestly, I hope you guys learned anything from this. It was
Anything.
Yeah, hopefully it was informative.
Yeah,
At very
sure.
least, they learned how not to pronounce your name.
This is true. Yeah. Say it again. All right, never mind.
Baghdasarian. Bag
You
of
got it.
avians.
Yep.
Mr. Baloney.
Yep.
Okay. All right, thanks, everybody.
Thank you guys.
Thank you so much.